So chapter 4, 2 Samuel. Chapter 4 is really the pivotal point in David's reign. As we know, he was reigning in Hebron, been there for about 7.5 years, and the nation was still divided. But what we see in chapter 4 actually is the point in time that removes all the obstacles towards uniting the nation. And we see some quite a few interesting things here, and that we might want to take note of as we go through our study. But anyway, Ishbosheth, the king of the northern kingdom, is murdered in this particular chapter, and we shall see how that transpires. So when we look at the people that we see in this context, we see that in Judah, basically we see David. But when we look towards Israel, there's a few people that are mentioned. We see the mention of Saul, Ishbosheth, his son, and then his other son, Jonathan, and his son, Mephibosheth. And then there's Saul's nephew, Abner. And then we see Rimmon and Beerothite, the Beerothite, and his two sons, Baana and Rechab. And these are the two men that actually do the murder of Ishbosheth, the king of Israel. I'm having trouble with my words this morning. But what I think is unique about this is that Rimmon the Beerothite was from the tribe of Benjamin, and that was also the tribe that Saul and his family was from. They were all Benjamites. But it says that Rimmon was a Beerothite, which was not a child of Jacob, but rather one of the inhabitants of the land that had fled to Benjamin and kind of just melded into the family, or at least into the land, and they were accepted by the Benjamites. So what it comes down to is that when Baana and Rechab killed Ishbosheth, it was not only the assassination of the king of Israel, but it was also the turning against, I guess you'd say, the tribe of Benjamin, and also the tribe or the family of Saul, because they were all from the same family, or I guess the same area. So I guess what I'm saying is the assassination attempt on a bishop. I'm having trouble with his name again this morning. The king of Israel is not only an assassination, but it was also an attempt to maybe get back at Saul and his family for what they had done in the past to their families. So anyway, we'll talk a little bit about that later. Then in Judah, we see the locations. Again, we see the pool of Hebron, and then the city itself. And then in Israel, we see Beeroth, which was a part of Benjamin, and Gideon and Israel. I guess you can see that. I've been tinkering with maps too. When you get out there and you start looking for maps to try to identify what we're talking about in this class, you just can't find them. But I did find a website, it's called BibleMapper.com, that you can build your own maps. So that's what I've been tinkering with, and hopefully you can read this. Can you see the names all right? Okay. What this particular map is a map of the nation itself as it becomes united under David. We see there's my pointer. We see the northern kingdom of Israel, which is right up through here. And then we see the nation of Judah, which is down here. I just wanted to show you the extent of the nation itself when it becomes united. And Geshur is up here. We have Phoenicia right up through here, and then Palestine right through here. So, Philistia right through here. So what we're seeing is the extent of the nation itself. Now, as far as the locations that are mentioned in this particular chapter, we see the capital of Israel, Hanayim, up here, and we see Hebron down here. So these were the two kings of the divided nation were ruling. Ziklag is down at the bottom, if you remember that. If he'll go away, I guess he's not. Then we have Gittim, And this becomes an interesting little tidbit when we get into chapter 5 and the Philistines. And then Jezreel up here. So it kind of gives us an idea of where the locations are at. Now, when the two men murder Ishbosheth, it says that they fled down the path, down the valley of Jordan, which is, I should have moved that out of the way, but I didn't, which is down through here and then down to Hebron. And the distance from Manaheim to Hebron, as the crow flies, is about 80 to 90 miles. I guess that's the distance from here to Houston. So it kind of gives you the idea of the distance that we have there. Now, if these gentlemen were, these assassins were following the path of least resistance, it's probably going to be more than that. So that's where they ran after they took care of the king of Israel. Now, the chapter synopsis, we have several things that we look at. After the death of Abner, we see that the whole nation of Israel was troubled. Verses 2 to 3, we learn of Baanah and Rechab. And in verse 4, we learn about Jonathan's son. Verses 5 through 7, we see the murder of Ishbosheth, and they flee to David. And then 9 through 12, David judges the men's act and has them put to death. And then Ishbosheth's head is buried in Abner's grave. So this is pretty much the synopsis of the chapter. It's a short chapter, and when you look at it, there's the events that happen there are not, there's not too many events. But there's a couple things I will point out as we go through it if I don't forget. Now it says, when Saul's son heard that Abner had died in Hebron, he lost heart and all Israel was troubled. Now this was, as we said before, a troubling time for them because Abner had died and now Israel was looking at the only leader they had was Ishbosheth, and he himself was not, as we have to surmise from what we read about him, not a strong leader. And it even says that, I think it was in the chapter before, that Ishbosheth himself had trembled. He was very concerned about what was happening because now he understood that Abner had made an alliance with David over in Hebron. All the tribes had agreed to it, and David's conditions were met. That was the deliverance of his first wife, Michal, back to him. And we saw in the last chapter that Joab had actually murdered Abner. And I got to thinking about this. This is one of the things too that kind of stuck in my head. Why did David did not do to Abner what he should have done, like he did to the Amalekite that killed Saul? And we saw in the last part of the chapter 3, in verse 39, he said that these men were too harsh for me, and he said he himself, was weak, and even though he had been anointed king. So he had not been king very long when this happened, and now he's faced with the decision of what to do with a great military leader that had the love and respect of the army. If he killed this leader, or at least put him in his place, then the army may retaliate against David. Now, I got to thinking about what Abner had done. And when Abner had killed, what Joab had done, when he had killed Abner, was that, according to the law of Moses, the revenge of blood, or was that something that was done premeditated? And when you're looking at the cause of battle, Abner had given his brother, Joab's brother, several opportunities to not engage him in warfare. And even after he identified him, told him to turn back 2 or 3 times, but he didn't. And finally, Abner stopped and hit him with his spear, the butt of his spear, and it went through him and killed him. So I got to thinking about that, and when I went back to the law of Moses over in Deuteronomy chapter 19, in verse 11, it says, "But if anyone hates his neighbor and lies in wait for him, rises against him and strikes him mortally so that he dies, and he flees to one of these cities, that is, one of the cities of refuge, then the elders of his city shall send and bring him from there and deliver him to the hand of the avenger of blood that he may die. Your eye shall not pity him, but you shall put away the guilt of innocent blood from Israel, that it may dwell with you. Now, there's no doubt in my mind that Joab had premeditated this murder, and he laid in wait and he rose against him. Even though he didn't flee to a city of refuge, he should have been, brought forth and dealt with this particular matter. Now, I'm bringing all of this out because when we look at what happened to the Amalekite in chapter 1, what happened to Joab in chapter 3, and what will happen to Diana in chapter 4 and his brother, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, at least in my part, in my point of view, unless we see that David was struggling to become a powerful king. He was not fully aware of the law of Moses, and the elders and the priests at that time were probably not well versed in the law as they should have been, because they, as we will see in chapter 6, what happens there. So I guess what I'm saying is the law of Moses was there. They had an inkling of it. They may have been taught aspects of it, but they were not fully aware of it. So be that as it may, David was struggling as a young man, a new king of Israel. So these two men, they get it in their head that they're going to do David a service, just like the Amalekite did in chapter 1. So these two men, let's see. Let's take a look at verse 2. He says, the name of the one was Baana, and the name of the other Rechab, and the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, and the children of Benjamin. For Beeroth also was part of Benjamin, because the Beerothites had fled to Gideon and were sojourners unto this day. Now, one of the things we need to remember too is that, and I couldn't find the reference, I guess I should have searched a little bit further than I did, but Saul had made it a point to try to, eradicate these people, and wasn't successful during his reign. So I guess they may have had some kind of grudge against Saul and his family for what had happened. But be that as it may, that was what some of the commentators had said that I read, but I couldn't find the location in which actually specifically pointed out that thing. And then the record goes to Jonathan's son, Ishbosheth. And we're told that he was about 5 years old when he found out his father and Saul had died, and his nursemaid picked him up, ran off with him, and I guess dropped him, stumbled or something. And in the process, the young boy came lame. I'm not sure what had happened, but evidently he couldn't use his legs. So I think the writer here interjects this because when we see the death of Ishbosheth, the 4 direct sons of his wife are now dead. And the only remaining descendant from Saul is Mephibosheth. But he's not in a position to assume the rulership of the kingdom. Because if he was 5 years old, this happened, let's say 7.5 years later, that puts him at 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, about 12, 13 years old. He was crippled. He could not lead a nation, especially in a time where a nation is in such a state that it was in. We'll read about him a little bit later on, but the record indicates that he was not, at least it shows us that he was not a suitable leader to replace Ishbosheth when he's assassinated. So Rechab and Baana set out, and they come to the heat of the day to the house of Ishbosheth, and he was lying on his bed at noon. And they came there all the way into the house as though to get wheat and to stab him. Now, I'm not sure if anybody here uses the Revised Standard Version translation. They do not do verse 6 correctly. In fact, they actually say that there was a gatekeeper there that was chafing the wheat and got tired and fell asleep, and they just snuck by this lady that was guarding the door. And I read that and I said, anyway, don't see how they get it, but they got it. Now, King Ishbosheth, when they went to him with pretense of getting wheat, these men were captains of their armies. And in order to get to the wheat, they evidently had to get the approval of the king. I guess there was probably some formality of, filling out the request and then taking it to the storehouse and getting it. And so there was probably, no suspicion about two captains of his army going in to want to feed their army. So off they go into there, but they find him asleep at this particular time because of the heat of the day. And then the record says that they stabbed him in the stomach, and Rechab and Baanah, his brother, escaped. When they came into the house, he was lying on his bed in his bedroom, and they struck him and killed him. They beheaded him and took his head and were all night escaping through the plain. Kind of these guys were always kind of gruesome in the way they did this. I guess if you're going to take evidence back to David, I guess it's easier to take the head back, which is positive identification, rather than trying to load the whole body back with them. But this seemed to be a common practice that when you kill someone, you definitely make sure that they're dead. And they did do this. So they went back to David, as we saw. They traveled down through the plain all night. And I'm not sure if it was how long the journey took, but they did say that through the night they went through the plain. And I guess trying to get out of the nation of Israel and into the area of Judah itself, so they may have some, protection from the armies of Israel as they pursued him. But as they come to David, he says, "Here is the head of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, your enemy, who sought your life, and the Lord has avenged my lord the king this day of avenged the Lord the king this day of Saul and his descendants." Now, no doubt in their mind, by this statement that they made to David, that they thought that they were giving David a great service by eliminating the last threat that opposed David's, or that may oppose David's uniting of the kingdom. Now, David reacted violently against these two men. Now, first of all, they said that Saul was your enemy. Second thing they told him was that he sought your life. And the third thing they told him was that the Lord had avenged him this day of Saul and his descendants. So Saul was, I don't think, ever David's enemy. Saul pursued David, and David was probably frustrated and a lot of anxiety with what Saul had done, but I don't think he was ever his enemy. He respected Saul for being the anointed king by God of Israel, and even though he sought his life, I don't think he ever had the animosity to consider Saul an enemy of himself. Now, somebody probably would say, well, it says right here, Saul was the enemy of David. I didn't go in and look at that, but from the mindset of David and the way he reacted to the assassinations of Saul's family, it just did not ring true to me that Saul was his enemy. Now, it was true that he sought their life, his life. There was no doubt about that. But the third thing that they told David was, the Lord has avenged my lord, the king, that is David, this day. Now, there's no indication whatsoever that God had told these men to go kill Ishbosheth. And so this was probably just a outright lie. And just as false as it could be. Now, the avenging the king this day of Saul and his descendants, the word avenge means, I guess, like the avenger of blood. I'm the one that's going to reckon this man for you, David. So what he's saying is God is now taking vengeance on Saul for the benefit of David. And to do that is to simply say that God is doing something without the proof that God is doing it. Now, David's reaction to all of this. Now, David answered Rechab and Baanah, his brother, the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, and said to them, as the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life from all adversity. When someone told me saying, look, Saul is dead, thinking to have brought good news, I arrested him and had him executed in Ziklag. Now, no doubt that these two captains of the armies of Israel also saw an opportunity that if they could gain favor in David's sight, that when the two nations are united, that they would find a place of importance over their armies in David's kingdom. Pretty much like the Amalekite thought that he could do being rewarded by David in some way. So David was saying, thought he was doing me a good deed, but he said, the one I thought I would give him a reward for his news. And then in verse 11, he says, how much more when wicked men, having killed a righteous person in his own house and on his own bed. You know, how can a person kill another man when he doesn't have an opportunity to defend himself? And Ishbosheth was asleep on his bed, being the heat of the day. They snuck up on him and they killed him in a very ruthless way. He says, how much more when wicked men have killed a righteous person in his own house? Now, what would make Ishbosheth righteous in David's eyes? You know, we can surmise a lot of things. But I think when we see the word righteous, I think David understood that the majority of David's problems may have risen from Abner's armies in trying to establish the strength of Israel. I think he understood that Ishbosheth was the son of the anointed king of Israel, and even though he was set up as a king, not in the way that God said, because he said that David was the anointed king of Israel, David seemed to respect the righteousness of Ishbosheth in that regard. He was the leader of the nation. You killed him in cold blood. This man has done nothing to me. He's done nothing to the people. And yet you think to gain something by his execution, you have guessed wrong. So a righteous person can be thought of in Ishbosheth in many ways. But at any rate, David saw this man as someone that was not worthy to be killed. Now, therefore, I shall not now require this blood at your hand and remove you from the earth. So David commended his young men, here we go again with the young men, and they executed them, cutting off their hands and feet, and hanged them by the pool of Hebron, that they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in the tomb of Abner in Hebron. Now, again, we see, the brutality that existed during this time. When we look at David's quick response to the execution of a righteous man by two people that were not familiar to him or part of his family or had any, bearing upon political pretense or political sense, he had no problem executing what we read over in, Deuteronomy chapter 19. When we see the Amalekite, again, by his own admission, I killed Saul. David said, by your own words, I'm going to put you to death. He didn't have a problem. He didn't know who the Amalekite was. When it comes to Joab, when he killed Abner, Joab was his nephew, leader of the armies. He stumbled. He had a problem bringing out the requirement of executing him, because at that time, David said that Abner had been a prince and a great man had fallen this day. He had done, a lot of damage in the past 2 or 3 years, but now he, I think, has reconciled with David. David looked at Abner and said, here's a man that understands the political necessities of saving life by uniting the kingdoms. I can see where this man will be of great use to me. And now Joab, under the pretense of being the avenger of blood for his brother that was killed in battle, which was not, David had trouble with this. So David was a righteous man. He was a man after God's own heart, but he's just like everyone else in here. Sometimes we struggle when it comes to having to face everyday events and how are we going to conduct ourselves in these events according to Christ, the law of Christ. So we understand David's, agony in some of these situations because we ourselves face these agonies. And I don't know how to answer that other than the fact that David understood that God will work, God has promised him the kingdom, and that he would do what God wanted him to do, and when he couldn't, he put the matter into God's hands, just as we saw back with Joab in chapter 3. And so they cut off their hands and their feet, and the only explanation that can be given, and that was what Keel and Delish said in their commentary, was that the hands shed innocent blood, and the feet fled the scene of the deed that was done wrong. So once they done that, they hanged them by the pool of Hebron for the people to understand that if you're going to do something like this, this is what's going to happen to you. It's kind of a deterrent. And the law of Moses said, if you hang someone, by the end of the day, take them down. Don't let them sit there overnight. So that was also a way of trying to encourage the people to do what was right and don't do what is wrong. It was a brutal time back then. I don't know any other way to say it. But I think that God understood too that the nation of Israel that was coming out of bondage, that didn't have the law before them, that did pretty much what they wanted, had to be taught in a harsh way. It's kind of like us raising children. Children don't know. When they start getting up in age a little bit, they want to do their own thing, and then just as Solomon says, you spare the rod, you spoil the child. And I think God, through the harshness of the punishments, the people could understand it because they themselves were harsh by nature. So when we look at this, don't try to compare them to our time, because we're probably a little bit more ingrained, or at least civilization is ingrained much in what the law of Christ teaches us. And we're not mentally in the same mindset as these people. So this was probably good for them back then. We look back upon it with, how could God possibly allow this to happen? And it's kind of like what Glenda had asked me, why did God tell these people to go in there and kill all these people in the nation of Israel when Joshua went into the promised land, when Joshua went in to claim it? And the only thing I can say there is that God had told Abraham that the iniquity, he said, this is your promised land, but it's not ready for you yet because the iniquity of the Amorites is not full. And it took them, 400 years? Was it 400? I think it was 400 years for them to actually get to the point where that iniquity was full. It had gotten to the point where God had said, your sins and your transgressions and your way of life, your hatred for God is to the point that I will no longer tolerate you to live on this earth. And so he set forth to eliminate these people and purge the land for his own people, the nation of Israel. Much like what God did in the time of Noah. That man had reached the point that he had regretted that he created them. He eliminated them, and he made the earth ready for Noah, who was the only man in his family that respected God. So God will punish those that will not adhere to his laws and love him like David did, or like Noah did. And the nation of Israel was given to the Israelites, or the land of promise was given to the Israelites. They didn't purge all the people, because Joshua, in the book of Joshua, it says that they had gotten to the point where they were tired of the wars and the slaughters that was required of them. And I can fully agree with that, but because of that, they left the people there and they become an antagonizing part of their life. But anyway, enough about that. Hopefully we can not dwell on that too much anymore, even though we'll talk about more of David's battles as we go through here. So Ishbosheth died, and at this point, the nation of Israel had no one to lead them. And as we begin chapter 5, he says, and all the tribes of Israel came to David to Hebron and spoke, indeed we are your bone and your flesh. Also in times past when Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel out and brought him in, and the Lord said, you shall shepherd my people, Israel, and you shall be a ruler over Israel. So they understood what David, the promise given to David by God, consisted of. They knew what Abner was going to do, uniting the kingdoms, and they were probably at the point where we don't have a strong military leader. 2 of our captains just committed murder by assassinating our king. We have got to move this forward and get ourselves under David and let him, by the act of God, making him king, straighten this nation out and try to unite us together under one family, the family of Jacob. So, politics, war, civil war, I mean, it was thick back then. And we see now the uniting of the kingdom. I did all the talking. Any questions, comments? So Ishbosheth, really wasn't a strong king, but he played a very, I think, important role at the end of this, because now we see that the nation, Saul's family could no longer sit upon the throne of Israel, and we see the nation itself being united. Now, I will say that Saul had 7 sons through his concubines, and we'll see that they will dealt with later on in this book. Now, so what can we surmise from this? Honesty and integrity must be the character of the child of God. When these 2 kings came, or these 2 captains came to David, they just downright lied to him about what God did for David. So, and David punished them for that. If you're going to have honesty and integrity, do so as a child of God. Don't think that you can trust in your own self-righteousness for your own integrity, because it's just not there. These men were acting in their own self-interest and their own self-righteousness. And do not deceive yourself concerning your actions. Just like the 2 men that killed Ishbosheth, they had deceived themselves into thinking that if we show David what a great deed we did for him in uniting this nation, he will reward us greatly. Don't deceive yourself. Think about what you're doing before you actually do it. And then finally, we must respect God's appointed leaders. These 2 men did not respect Ishbosheth, even though he was not appointed by God. He was the leader of the nation. And David considered him a righteous man and punished these people not only for killing him, but for lying about what God had said and for showing disrespect for the appointed leader of God. If Abner had not died, and if these 2 men had not assassinated a king, David would have another strong leader of an army. He would have probably dealt in a righteous manner with Ishbosheth. He may not have killed him, but I think he would have put him out to pasture and said, you will stay out of the affairs of state, but you will live. And he showed mercy to Jonathan's son, as we'll see later in this book. So David was not all, encompassed as, I'm going to get rid, he's not a bad person. He's a righteous person. And I think he deals righteously, even though he may stumble along the way. But we should respect God's appointed leaders, just like David showed what would happen if you don't. So any questions or comments on all this? Nothing?
Good job.
I don't know if it's a good job or not. Let me ask you this. Has anybody taken the time to see the movie yet? Don't say that.
Which movie?
Don't say that. The newsletter I put out yesterday afternoon, there is a link to a YouTube video about how David and Joab's actions took the city of Jerusalem, or the stronghold of Jerusalem. And it's about 5 minutes long, and I think it's well worth looking at. You know, there's others on YouTube that are, you know, a lot longer, but I've thought, you know, we're busy people, 4 or 5 minutes, you can swing that. So take a look at it if you haven't. If you've trashed the email or the text message and you need it, just let me know and I'll be more than happy to send it out to you, because it's a good little presentation. As we'll see in chapter 5, David makes the challenge that whoever can take the stronghold will become captain of my armies. And of course, Joab sees the opportunity not only be captain or the leader of the Judean army, but here I can become the leader of both Judean and the Israelite nation armies. And that was a position that was, I think, he was greedy for. So he was the first one. He went in up the water shaft. He climbed up, I think they said it was about 5 meters up this water shaft into the city, and was able to bypass the guards and unlock the gates for the army to come in. So take a look at it. It's an interesting little video. And like I said, if you don't have a link to it, let me know and I'll send it to you. But take time to look at that. Anything else? Okay, chapter 5, I'm not going to get into today. Chapter 5 is an interesting, you know, and concerning Jerusalem itself, nobody had been able to conquer the stronghold. They were able to conquer the surrounding area, but they were never able to conquer the stronghold, and David was the first one to do it. And Jerusalem is an important city because it pretty much centers itself in the center of the kingdom. And it was not favored by, you know, one territory over the other, but he kind of gives him the access to the northern kingdoms equally to the southern kingdom, and also in his wars to the Ammonites and the Moabites and Edomites. It's just kind of a central location. He was able to defend the nation against those that were around about him. So Jerusalem was an important city, and we'll talk about that Wednesday night.